Rochester Real Estate Show. Jason Mancuso, Anthony Butera of the Anthony Butera team at Keller Williams Realty. Been a minute. Welcome back.
Would it be awkward if I changed teams?
No, we could probably arrange for that.
We get through that.
Anywho, getting the big guy here for really a halftime show, I guess. Talk about the market that we've been in so far in 2023 and what could be ahead. I mean, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about are the predictions that were made so far this year and what's going on and the results, and then we'll offer our predictions that are sure to be wrong, I guess, moving forward. But there's some logic to it. So I don't know. What's your take? What are you thinking?
Well, I'd like to start off by saying we've been predicting like weathermen.
Yeah.
Right? All signs point to, and then something else happens, right? I could go back a year, and we were shocked a year ago that the inventory issue continued, and we were shocked that the average sales price continued to climb a year ago.
Right.
So then last year when it happened, all signs pointed to, well, this is the end. Not only did we peak, we can fully anticipate average sales prices to recede. Like, There's no way this goes on any longer. And here we are. The average sales price year to date has gone up another 11%. I mean,
let's, before we dive in, I think important to talk about why, these predictions are made. Year ago this time, we were at that point 3, 4, 5 months into the interest rates booming from all-time lows.
Yeah.
And just the logical prediction would be, okay, that's going to dry up demand.
Sure.
To at least be in a balanced position. Like I think, nobody necessarily expected inventory to be cured and all these homes double, triple up and rush to the market and there's an inventory rush, but the balance of supply and demand gets just that, more balance because there's less demand because of interest rates.
That would have, historically that has always been the case.
Right. And therefore prices drop or come off, the increasing.
Prices drop, inventory opens up,
right.
The market starts to stabilize, and let's face it, if the interest rates were 20% right now, there wouldn't be a home for every buyer that would still be okay purchasing at a 20% interest rate. That's the reality.
And that's where it gets dangerous to make predictions, right? Because you say something extreme, and I know we're just talking, right? But 20% extreme to where okay, that would worry me, right? But in the same breath, if you would have told me in 2021, when we're in the 3s and the 4s, that next year and the year after we're going to be at high 6s, sometimes 7% interest, and we're still going to be dealing with the same shit show.
Yeah.
Competition-wise for buyers and sellers, still seeing those premium pricing come through, I would have told you you're nuts.
Yeah.
So just like I'm telling you, hey, you're nuts to say 20% interest rate is going to lead to the same market. Who the hell knows, right?
Yeah, we don't know, right? And yet, so if someone asked you today, where do we reach a point where we start to see some stabilization? Or, let me ask you this question. How many years out are we from a buyer's market?
Yeah.
To me, it seems like light years out. It seems like there'd have to be so much happening in order for that to enter our market. It seems like so long ago because let's face it, it has been.
Well, yeah.
Right? We're over a decade away from a buyer's market. More than a decade.
You mean from the past?
From the past, from the previous buyer's market, right? When you and I got licensed, you're talking 2011, 2012, that was a buyer's market.
Yep.
Listings were sitting on the market forever. There was way more listings than there were buyers.
Yep.
Although the interest rates were low, consumer confidence was even lower. The economy was in shambles at that time. And yet here we are. We're such a unique market because the interest rates are much higher and the desire is even higher than the interest rates.
Yeah.
Right? And as we're trying to control, and cost of living, right? Like cost of living is higher than it's ever been, and yet everything they're trying to do to calm this down, it really hasn't done anything. It hasn't put the fire out. It's kind of just fanned it.
Well, at least in the housing market.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Because I mean that's a the inflation conversation and cost of living, like there's like real estate is the primary quote unquote problem to that.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, everything's more expensive than it ever has, and I'll go on a limb here. I don't mean to be like a conspiracy theory type of thing, but I think when you look at this, like it's just the facts of how things work.
Yep.
They want 2% inflation, meaning that year over year pricing only increases 2%. Meaning pricing only increases 2%. We're not talking about getting to, okay, how do we get to -10?
Yeah.
Right? To where, the cost of eggs and the cost of everything drops 10%. It's just like we just want it to increase very marginally.
Yeah.
And when it's 8-9% like it was last year, that's a big problem. The steps they're taking are working because it's at 3% right now.
Sure.
They're just still not where they want to be overall is that target. So like cost of living isn't going to come down.
Well,
and I think we're seeing that. Like people are spending it, real estate or dinner.
Yeah, people are spending like drunken sailors still. But I do think that between the cost of living and the interest rate, it's not that I know between the cost of living increase and the interest rates where they are now for a mortgage, people are staying put.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you have that's probably one of the top 2 or 3 primary objections that we get. Why sure I'd like a bigger house or I'd like to downsize, but I'm locked in at a 3.5% interest rate and I'm looking at 7 now.
Because what's happened is I've watched my career evolve. I would have those buyers that every 2 to 3 years they would get that itch for a different house. Those buyers are no longer buying every 2 to 3 years because those buyers locked in at a 3% interest rate or maybe even a 2.75% interest rate. Those buyers that are more inclined to buy something every few years because that's just what they like to do can no longer afford to do that. Even as much as the average sales price has increased, it hasn't increased as much as from a percentage standpoint as the interest rates have.
Well, and you also have the dynamic where interest rates at 6-7%, historically speaking, isn't terrible.
No.
Right?
But
the last 10 years, we've grown spoiled.
Yep.
I get it. And you have these comparative thoughts.
Yeah.
Right? The problem is there'd probably be a lot more people jumping off the fence if pricing wasn't still increasing 11%, like you said, year over year in our market. It's just still expensive, or pricing continues to go up. We have this fierce competition going on, and now you're talking about the cost of the money that you're borrowing to buy the home being double from what you bought last time. It's just a tough it's mental justification.
Yep.
I refer to it as when the rates were high 2s, low 3s, and you talk about competition and the bidding wars and everything in 2020, 2021 when that happened.
Yeah.
I refer to it as one of the only times in the history of real estate where people just made the why not?
Yeah.
Rates is, this low. Why not? Sure, $100,000
this.
over asking price. Why not?
Yep.
This business that we're in and for consumers buying or selling a home, it's not a pair of shoes. It's not a car.
No.
It's typically you need to buy a home. Yeah. There's compelling reasons why you're looking to buy a home and sell your current home or buy your first home. Mm-hmm. Not screw it. We'll move, right? Yeah. And for most people, don't get me wrong, there's luxury decisions that could be made, but for most, the majority of Americans, it's this is a serious decision we need to make, and we need to analyze it from all fronts. That low interest rate allowed more casual decision making, I guess, right?
It did. It didn't matter how fast the average sales prices were climbing. But we talk about 6-7%. Still, historically speaking, that's right around average, right? And yet it doesn't matter because consumers right? Real estate consumers and real estate agents, we seem to have amnesia every 3 years about what happened the 3 years prior. We're living in a 3 year three year world. We forget what happened prior to that. But what's driving purchases and sales today is different than what was driving sales and purchases 3 years ago or 6 years ago, right? And let's face it, the majority of our clients today, you've got estates, you've got relocations, you've got divorces. Thank God for that.
But we're just back to those need reasons, right?
Yeah.
Death,
People need to
divorce,
sell,
marriage,
necessarily
babies,
want to. Yeah.
job change, relocation, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is, like, generally speaking, that's the way it typically plays out.
Yeah.
And again, don't get me wrong, there's always luxury decisions that can be made. I'm just saying, like, 2020, 2021 was a 2-year window where, like, the casual luxury decisions that were made were at the highest rate ever, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's just
now we're back to, like, normal.
Yeah, but it's still, like, it's confusing. The world's confusing right now, right? Our economy is confusing, right? I mean, we're at a time where the cost of living has climbed so fast, and yet, again, we're going back to it, but, like, people are not afraid of spending money. Like, and listen, no one's ever going to feel bad for me, but I mean, I see it. You go through the checkout aisle at Wegmans, right? You go to purchase a car, like,
it's
I
more
still
expensive.
I can't wrap my head around what anything costs anymore.
Everything is expensive.
So you get the middle income family, and it's like, holy crap! How are they alive?
Well, again, in predictions, right? 2 years ago, talking about everything that we're talking about now. If you just would have said, hey, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think everybody hearing that, their reaction would have been like, ooh, man, that's going to be bad.
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, I don't want to, speaking too generally, right? I'm sure there's plenty of people that are hard times, right? But you go to any restaurant and freaking any night of the week.
Busy.
And it just, doesn't seem like things are bad, right? That frugal type spending, doesn't really seem like it is what it is. When you say all this stuff out loud, which is good, right? But housing, back to real estate. Where we're at, State of the Union right now, first half of the year. I don't know, fair to call it much of the same. If you listen to this episode last year,
It is.
And the year before?
I
guess there's less extreme to it, is the way to describe it. To a degree.
It depends how you're looking at it.
Yeah, in spots.
Yeah. Right? It depends how you're looking at it, right? Extreme's walking away from a 2.75% interest rate to jump into a 7% interest rate. That's extreme. Like, that's what's happening. That's different than it was 2 years ago when we were still in the threes. I just think that moving forward, something's got to happen. Like, something has to change. I mean, we're going to see, nationwide, year to date, number of transactions as a nation is down substantial. You're talking 20%, right? We're not feeling it that drastic here locally, but I mean, there's some areas in the country where they are feeling something way different. They can't give a house away.
Well, that's it's important to address because we're speaking mainly from Western New York market, right? Like other areas have truly shifted already into a buyer's market.
Well, sure, our average sales price is still substantially lower than the national average. So when I say there's markets where you can't give a house away, we're talking Austin, Texas. We're talking Phoenix, right? Your average sales prices are $600,000-$700,000. That 7% interest rate impacts those buyers way more substantially than they do here locally, as opposed to borrowing at 7% on $200,000.
And they feel the shift more there because if you bought in the peak and you bought for $1 million. And it was justified then. That shift where they're at right now, that it could be $850,000 right now.
Their values
maybe even more.
Yeah,
and that's I mean, the $150,000 in that example. That's a lot of cake.
Yep.
Here, when we do truly feel a shift and values start to adjust, I still think like we're not in a doom and gloom scenario to where if you bought a house for 300, it's going to go down to 200.
No.
But 300, you have to sell in an inopportune time, maybe
Yeah.
280.
We are going to hit that point,
Sure.
right? We are going to hit that point, and I don't necessarily think it's going to be like foreclosure and short sale world
Yeah.
because
Right.
everybody buying today, for the most part, they're putting 20% down, right?
Yeah.
The majority, or cash.
A lot of it, yeah.
Right, so they can take the hit if the values went down 10% and they put 20% down, they could absorb that hit. Where we got into trouble and we had to live through like 2011, 12, 13 was everybody that borrowed on an FHA note and they overextended themselves. Market shifts. Now there's way more inventory to choose from. They were backwards. We were seeing a lot of short sales. We were seeing more foreclosures.
Yep.
But right now, I guess the light at the end of the tunnel is that the majority of today's consumers that purchased homes, they have enough skin in the game to get through it. I just don't know when it's going to happen. That could happen soon, where we hit a point of like, okay, we finally plateaued. Now we're going to see prices recede a little bit. Only due to the fact that we're not getting 10 offers anymore. Maybe
Right.
it's 2. Maybe it's 1.
Right.
Maybe average days in the market goes up to 14 days, right? Which sounds like
I laugh.
Yeah.
I laugh.
That would have been a dream 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And now if you're on the market for 14 days.
10 years ago, 45.
Oh my God, that was bragging rights
Right.
10 years ago.
Yeah,
that
you were marketing that, yeah.
You were trying to get a 6-month listing agreement, right? Because a lot of times that's how long it took. And now it's funny because you're on the market for 14 days. It's like, shit, what happened?
Yeah, I think to keep going on the, why why we're anti doom and gloom, I guess, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you look at the data, the foreclosure rate is at some of the lowest ever,
Yep.
the lowest levels ever.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the last big thing in 2008 was due in fact to I don't know what you want to call it, almost like fraudulent practice, right?
Yeah.
To where, big stuff happens in the economy, people lose their jobs, the rates kicked in higher at that point for people, their payments went up, so now it's like, I can't make this payment. Shouldn't have been approved for that
Correct.
to begin with in a lot of cases.
Non-income
It's a
verifications.
lot tighter right now
Yeah.
to where like you're buying a house, you're buying it undoubtedly from a financial qualification standpoint, at least from the bank's eyes, whether
Yeah.
you truly can or not. Hopefully you can. So like these scenarios where I mentioned 300 and maybe market value's 280 when they do need to sell, back to need versus want. If they truly need to, there's probably still that equity to get them through it. It's just not going to be like a fruitful financial, sale, right? I mean, I can speak to this personally in terms of, our first home, 2008, we sold in 2015. We sold it for 20 grand less than what we bought it for, around that.
Wow.
It was 15 or 20. Ended up, like, I thought I was going to have to cut a check for a little bit.
Yeah.
Ended up getting a little bit back after tax escrows and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was like, it sucked. You never want to sell a house for less than what you buy it for.
Yep.
But we still ended up, like, not in a super bad situation. We needed to move.
You needed the move, and then the house that you bought for.
Yeah, I mean, perspective on the back end of it, like
Yeah.
never buying that house again for that price, and what's
Yeah.
it worth now?
Yep.
So just there's a full circle to this that I think we weren't able to be in, what do you want to call it, 15, 20 years ago,
Yeah.
that we're back in now because, it's just designed to work that way with good intention. Right? There wasn't good intentions with the mess that we got ourselves into 15 years ago.
Correct. And it's impossible to time the market
Right.
perfectly.
Sure, exactly.
But every 10 years, it corrects the market,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Every 10 years, the market will correct itself. And it's happened every 10 years.
In that cycle type of concept. yeah.
Correct, right?
But it's also in the same breath, opposite type of logic, a 10-year run.
Yeah.
There's in the history, there's never been you bought a house 10 years ago and sell it 10 years later that you have negative value in that cycle.
Correct.
Like
Yep.
over time things
Yeah.
balance. You may be breaking even in theory,
Yeah.
but you're not real estate doesn't depreciate over the long run.
Time-
No matter what the market is, like our advice, somebody buying a home is like, like how long you plan on living here? And if they're saying like a year, is this really the right decision to make?
Yeah. Nope, it's definitely not. And, in the same breath, those same sellers that feel like they're trapped because the interest rate is as low as it is, right? Let's just say they bought 4 years ago, and now they want to sell, and they don't want to walk away from their 3.5% interest rate into a 7. Okay, well, I get that. Nobody does. And yet, how much equity have you gained in those 4 years that you had nothing to do with, that the market gave to you? Right? The equity earned over those 4 years was way more substantial than the interest that you're going to have to pay short term, because the interest rates are going to come down again. But if you guys are waiting for 3s, 2s, may never happen again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they did, and predictions again. This time last year, the charts of the predictions of where the rates would start to fall were right around this time, and it ain't happening yet at that rate. So again, predictions are largely wrong. But I mean, I think to offer one up, like hopefully we do get into the 5s. Yeah. I just don't know. I mean, hopefully it is in 2024.
What's interesting,
I just don't know.
What's interesting is when the rates were in the 3s and even the 2s, right? None of us, and you and I were never talking about it, like nobody was saying, what are the unintended consequences of these interest rates? Well, we're kind of living in that time right now, but nobody was even thinking about it because the market was so fruitful. We couldn't do anything wrong. Yep. People were just, people were spending, people not necessarily spending as much as they could, but they were able to stretch their budget because the rates were so low. I mean, I have 2 mortgages that are in the 2s.
Yeah.
Right?
It's insane.
Like, I don't want to.
It's insane.
Number one, I'm in no rush to pay those off early.
Sure.
Right? And number 2, it would be tough for me to sell those properties. I think with the rate being that low, I don't think I would sell either one of them. I would probably just turn them into rentals. Yeah,
and I mean, what you were saying earlier is a good point, because it's like nobody 3 years ago was like, well, when the rate does increase, we're going to be in this tough position where nobody's going to want to move because they're, looking at the rate that they're locked into and now the new cost of it. It's just like, take it. Yeah. Like, again, like I alluded to, like, I was like, let's do it. Why not? Yeah. What do we have to lose?
You needed a house at that point. You probably still would have bought a house at that point if the interest rates were at 7, but because you bought it where you did, now that they are closer to 7 or at 7, now your mindset's like, well, we can't move. Right. So it's just, I get it. I don't get me wrong. I fully understand, but I'm also I'm the person that rolls the dice a little bit and is like, if I find something that makes total sense, we're only here for so long. Sure. Do what you got to do. YOLO. Don't overspend, right? Yeah. But if there's something that you always wanted and it's available and you can afford it, right? Because that's the other conversation. What people can afford, like, that's changing, right?
Yeah. Well, and you're living by the advice that we would give any client, right? Yep. Like, you start with where you're financially comfortable. Yeah. Like, don't overextend it just because the rate is 2.5%. That was our advice then. Yeah. It remains chalk no matter what market we're in. Yeah. So, right now it's we're like you really spend a lot of time thinking of that just because of the cost of the money that it is and the cost of the homes that you have to use that money for. Yeah. So, I mean, to recap 2023 so far, and again, I guess the best way to describe it is not much has changed. No. Inventory's still low. From last year, interest rates are still high and demand is still high. And we're still seeing competition, still seeing bidding wars, still not getting offers accepted with inspection contingencies, still not getting offers accepted as a buyer with a home to sale and contingent on that. Now, what I'll say with all of that, there's like flashes of it happening. Yeah. Whereas 2 years ago, 3 years ago, non-existent for to generalize everything, right? So there's aspects that are loosening up depending on location, type of home, price point,
there's demographical
condition.
There's demographical pushback in certain spots.
Sure.
Right? And that's just, that's happening, like you said, it's happening more now than it did prior. But like we talk about investment, like what's the safest investment? Like you guys, a lot of you have 401ks. You may have a pension, you may have an annuity. You may just be invested in the stock market. Listen, what if your investments never went down? They only climbed, and some years they flatlined, and they never went down. We have people that have to try to time their retirement based on where their 401k is or where their annuity is at that time.
Sure.
Well, this is still an investment that has never gone down before, and it may never go down.
I think that's a lot of, there's a big opportunity just in real estate in general on the consumer end of things to really embrace that mentality.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking about like go buy 10 rental units and cash flow and all that stuff. We're just like look at your home as an investment and treat it that way. And treat it, the same way that you would with, your 401k and your financial advisor of like, okay, like we're not touching this for the next 30 years, whatever the example is. You got to have a plan associated with any purchase that you're making.
Yeah.
Put your investment hat on when you're making these family related decisions or personal decisions.
Yep.
It's important to do that. Looking ahead for the rest of this year, safe prediction, probably not much going to change. The one thing I'll offer is like, we usually see a lot of seasonality hit come the fall and then into the winter and, into fall, holidays, winter, right?
Yep. November, December are historically our softest months.
Sure. And it all kind of starts in September with the kids going back to school. And
Thanksgiving to New Year's is time just freezes.
I would like to be optimistic to think that outside of that time, like the holiday time is always just, slow.
No one wants to do anything.
I would like to think that, especially October, and leading up to Thanksgiving, that it's going to be a little more active than it typically is. Yeah. And the reason I say that is I think consumers are totally acclimated to the interest rate at this point.
Yeah. Totally acclimated to what the market is and lack of inventory and the game that you have to play. It's just, I think there's going to be, why not in the fall versus like, what are we going to wait for? Who knows what the rate's going to be in the spring? Who knows what the market could be like in the spring? What if everybody sells in the spring and it balances the market out and we don't have that premium as a seller and buyers to be encouraged to continue to look versus a lot of the seasonality is, again, kids going back to school. But if you haven't bought and you've been looking all summer and spring in the market that we've been living in for really the past 5 years or so, a lot of times it's like, the kids are going back to school. I got to deal with this. Like we've lost 10 offers all summer and I'm done, and you take a break. Stay active, because at the end of the day, if it makes sense financially and it's a house that you want to live in, does it really matter what time of year? No, and I'll also be optimistic and say that most divorces are caused by financial strain and fights, and with the cost of living, we'll get a lot of listings through that as well. I mean, again, death, divorce, marriage, babies, job change, all these reasons why, there's always those that have to homes to buy and sell. Yeah. So, not much of a State of the Union in terms of groundbreaking news flash type of stuff. It's the same as the old. I mean, it's still competitive out there. There's a path that you can take as a buyer to not have this seem like you're beating your head against the wall for something that's just never going to happen. Obviously, for sellers, it's a lot easier of a conversation because it's, hey, there's never a bad time in this market that we're in, and you're gonna have a quick sale if it's priced accordingly, and you should have a competitive situation play out to where you get the most possible. We're on like year 6 of every year. Yeah. Not only sellers but buyers saying, "Shit, I should have bought last year. Mm-hmm. Damn it, I should have sold last year." Right. So it's like this is going to come to an end at some point. Right? Don't be afraid. Like we said, don't know when. Yeah, we just don't know when. But again, every 10 years, the market corrects itself. You're not going to get hurt. That all the historical data shows that no one's really ever gotten hurt when we're talking about what home values are. Right. So, good stuff. Halftime show over, 2023. 2023. Crazy. Yeah.
We're getting through it.
That's crazy.
Thanks for joining us. Check us out, AnthonyButerraTeam.com. Rochester Real Estate Show. Checking out.
Thanks.